Hello and welcome to The Luxury of Choice, a B2B sales skills and tips podcast brought to you by the training team at George James Limited. My name is Steve Vaughan. I'm a senior sales trainer for George James, as well as the host and producer of this podcast. This is our latest mid-month interview show when I interview a subject matter expert in a field that I think you, the listener, will find of interest and the topic of value. Today, my guest is Luke Evans. Luke is the founder of Heddway, a new business specialising in mental fitness. Luke, welcome to the podcast and thanks for your time today.
Hi, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
So I guess my first question is what is mental fitness?
What is mental fitness? A good place to start,
It
isn't
probably
it?
is, yeah.
Yeah. So my definition of mental fitness is the capacity to maintain emotional balance, stay resilient, and remain focused and optimistic amid life's challenges.
Okay, great. So let's wind back a little bit. So you and I got to know each other, I guess, a couple of months ago when you joined remotely a George James training team meeting, and we're all super impressed by yourself and your enthusiasm, your passion, and I really want to explore that today on the podcast to find out a bit more about what it is that makes you passionate about what it is you do. So if we can, what I'd like to do is go right back, because when we met you on that Zoom call, you told a story or your story of your life and what brought you to where you are now. So perhaps, you could just in your own words go back about your life and what made you eventually come to start a company specializing in mental fitness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love this question, right? Because you could have said, what is Heddway? What do you do? But ultimately what you're asking is why.
We'll get there for sure.
Yeah, no, that's fine, mate. I think asking why is far more important. We don't ask why enough in business, in life. People don't question themselves. They don't question anything, around them sometimes. So why did I start Heddway? That's a brilliant question. And I do need to tell you a little bit about my personal story, because this has been something that's been in my mind for a number of years in terms of, right, this is what I want to do in the future. But for a long time, it was a future plan. But yeah, to tell you a little bit about me. So I'm Welsh, guilty as charged. You could probably hear my Welsh accent. But I grew up in South Wales.
Okay.
The main employer in the town was the local steelworks. My older brother was a plumber. My father was a plumber's merchant. A lot of my friends at the time were going into apprenticeships for trades, electricians, plumbers, construction workers. And as you can imagine, in that type of world, which is very masculine, sometimes quite ego-driven, talking about mental fitness or talking about emotions was just something that just never happened, right?
No, sure.
If you showed any sign of vulnerability, you'd be ridiculed, you'd be laughed for it. Now, I'm a very sensitive person. I was back then, I am now. As a man, I'm sensitive. I feel absolutely everything. And growing up in South Wales, I was a very sensitive young man. And I found it quite difficult being in that environment with no space to express myself, ultimately. And where I was, it was quite normal to go out on the weekend. You'd see at least one fight. Like, violence was very, very normal, as it is in a lot of places. But
yeah, sure.
I was in this kind of macho environment and I was very sensitive and I had nowhere to go with my feelings. I couldn't really express myself. My home environment was quite stressful at times.
Okay.
My mother's an incredible woman. I wouldn't be the man I am without my mother.
Sure.
But my dad's quite an unpredictable character, very volatile. And it was quite stressful being at home, quite
So
a
you
lot of
couldn't
time.
really bring out your feelings and your sensitivity in your family life, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. So what that led to, Steve, was that I just bottled everything up, and everything, sort of insecurities, sensitivities, anger that I had within myself as well. I would bottle it up. And by the time I went to university, I had an anger problem. I had a real anger problem.
Right.
And to tell you the extent of it, right, I've been in hospital numerous times from fighting, been arrested from fighting, got a scar underneath my eye here, scar on my nose, scar on my back, scar on my hand, all from fighting.
Wow.
And people I meet now, I sort of tell them these stories and they're kind of looking at me like, is this the same guy? But it's a real problem for me. And it all came to a head for me in 2009. I was working for a pharmaceutical company called AstraZeneca as part of my placement year in uni. And I went on a night out. Someone was picking on my friend and I just intervened. I punched the chap in the mouth and didn't think anything of it. I got thrown out of the club. to me, I was just protecting my friend. It was absolutely normal. I lost my temper, but the way I would justify it was, they shouldn't have been picking on my friend. And it was all very normal to me. I woke up the next day and my hand was in quite a bit of pain. I didn't think anything of it, right? When you sort of have fights and stuff, waking up the next day with a bit of pain is just, part and parcel.
Of the course, yeah.
Part of the course, mate, yeah. And just went about my day, woke up on the Sunday morning and my hand was like super, super painful. And, a closer inspection, I had a bit of skin that was hanging off my knuckle and it was going a little bit off colour.
Wow.
So one of the girls I lived with at the time said, Luke, you need to go to hospital. And I sort of reluctantly said, right, okay, let's go. So I went down to Leicester Royal Infirmary and the first thing they did was they poured iodine over my open wound, which had been there for 2 days. Yeah, so right? Ow. So I'm like, trying to grit my teeth in A&E. But the nurse explained something to me. She said, Luke, you've got what we call a fight bite, which means that your hand has been infected because there's more bacteria in a human mouth than there is a dog's mouth.
Is that right? Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, right, okay. And she said, we have to keep you overnight, we have to admit you to the hospital, and we have to operate on your hands.
Gosh.
And I said, right, okay, no worries. So they kept me in overnight. I went in for emergency surgery the next day under general anaesthetic. And when I came out with the operation, I was kind of sat in bed and I didn't tell anybody I was there. I didn't want to worry my family. And the nurse came around a few hours later and she said, Luke, can you wiggle your fingers for me? And I said, I can't. And she said, right, I'll come back later. She came back and she said, Luke, love, can you wiggle your fingers? And I had my arm up like this. And I said, I can't feel my arm. I said, I can't feel my arm. I can't feel my hand. And she said, all right, okay, we'll give her a couple of hours. She came back. She asked me again, Luke, love, can you wiggle your fingers? And I said, I can't feel anything. And she said, right, okay, we need to speak to the doctors.
Wow. Frightening.
Yeah. But you know what's mad about it? I wasn't scared at all at the time because it was all very just like, I just normalized this sort of stuff, right? And the doctor came around and said, look, the operation hasn't gone to plan. We need to take you back into the operating room tomorrow. So second night in hospital, back under the knife, general anaesthetic again. And I come out and eventually, the physiotherapist comes to visit me. She explains you have to get movement in this hand now after 2 operations. It's going to be a long road. You might potentially lose a bit of dexterity in your ring finger.
Good grief.
And, the short of it is I wiggled my fingers and off I went and, I was gone. But when I was in that hospital bed, I had a lot of time to think. And if you can imagine, I didn't tell anyone I was there, right? So for 3 days, 2 nights. And for the very first time, I started to ask myself some important questions. And the most important question I could ever have asked myself at that time was, Luke, why are you so angry? And I just, for that point, for the first time in my life, I got curious, not furious. And I started to think about, okay, well...
Oh, a great way of putting it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a huge catalyst for me, Steve, just asking myself questions. Because quite often, I would say, well, it's all external, right? It's his fault. That guy did this to my friend and I was protecting my friend. Everything's external. I'm just reacting. But no, it's, okay, well, look internally. Why did you react like that? What happened to you in that moment? And it was quite... It's quite interesting, right? Because I wasn't even in the fight. I was completely removed. I wasn't even arguing with this chap.
So do you think that was from your upbringing, from your background, from your growing up as a kid, as you said, in that kind of macho, masculine environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So it was like it was 2 things going on. Firstly, I saw someone unable to defend themselves almost. And that triggered something in me which I didn't like, someone being bullied, which I'd kind of, growing up in the environment I'd seen that a lot and I didn't think it was right.
No, understood.
But then also just, in my mind, it was very normal. Someone's being bullied. I need to help him. Bang, punch the guy straight in the mouth. It wasn't even sort of, it was normal for me to just to step in and do that. But I started to ask myself, why? Why are you so angry, Luke? And that was, that was probably, how old was I then? I was late teens, maybe 20. Okay. 21 maybe. And I went on a journey, right? Honestly, probably four years maybe, where I just lived inside of my head trying to work this out on my own. And I actually went from a place of being out of control with my temper to being completely in control. I worked through all of my anger. I worked out what triggered me and I just did everything in my head.
So did you get any counselling or any sort of therapy or any external support on this, or was this something you were just processing in your own mind, in your own head?
I wish I got therapy, Steve. I wish I got therapy earlier than I did. I went to therapy probably 5 or 6 years later.
Okay.
And it was quite interesting because I sat down with the therapist and I explained everything up until that point that had happened in my life. And even the therapist said to me, "Oh, can I just check if you had therapy before?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Oh, I can't believe that you can rationalize all of this."
Incredible.
And then at the end of the session, he asked me for a second time. He said, "Can I just confirm you've never had therapy?" I said, "This is my first session ever." And he said, "Wow, that's remarkable." But I wish it wasn't, Steve, because it's weird. I've got mixed feelings. I'm proud in the way that I processed it on my own, but I'm also a little bit sad because if I went and reached out for help sooner, I wouldn't have had those 4 years of just pure...
Internalizing almost, yeah.
Internalizing, yeah. I lived in my head. In my head.
So how do we get from, that incredible journey, really, of internalizing your anger, coming out as a different person almost, really, in terms of managing your emotions, managing your anger? How do we get that to where we are now, which is to running your own business, exploring these kind of things?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in between that, that we haven't talked about, but it's probably quite relevant in terms of the lens of mental fitness. So I worked through my anger, and I thought that I'd worked through it all, and I thought that I was good. I thought I was mentally fit. And it all kind of changed when I met my wife in a good way, because I met my wife in my late 20s. And when I was getting to know my wife, in the very early days, we would text on WhatsApp, getting to know each other, that kind of like exciting phase where you're just sort of texting a lot. And she used to speak about her mum a lot, and how she loved her mum and her stepdad as well. And I could tell that they were really close, and I loved that because I'm close to my family as well. But she never really spoke about her biological father. And I asked her one day, I said, "I've noticed you speak about your mum and your stepdad, but you don't speak about your dad." And she said, "Oh, he's not around." And I said, "Well, where is he?" And she wrote back 5 words I'd never forget. She wrote back, "He took his own life." And I was reading it, and it was a complete kind of U-turn of how I was feeling in the moment, because it was exciting. There was this beautiful girl that I've just met.
Your relationship, all that,
getting to know each other. Gosh. And then she said that, and I was almost like, whoa, like it hit me like a steam train, because I was like, this poor girl has lost her father to suicide at a very young age. And she's very family orientated as well, right? So it was a big whirlwind and sort of, all these emotions inside of me at the time. And what I realized after that is I reflected and I thought, okay, well, where would I be if I hadn't worked through my anger? And where would I be if I hadn't learned to talk about my emotions? Because that was the one thing, Steve, that was the catalyst for me to get through my anger, was just learning just to open up and talk. And it's so easy for people to do. Yeah, it's so hard.
Absolutely.
We're scared of being judged, or we're scared of... people just not understanding us. And quite a lot of the time when we're struggling, sometimes we feel like we're the only one, and we feel like people can't help us, so we don't share. But talking about my emotions was the one thing that really was the catalyst for me getting over my anger issues. And from what I know about my wife's dad is that he didn't reach out for help. He didn't speak to anybody, and he suffered in silence. And ultimately it got to a point, and this is really sad, where it was so painful to live with himself and his own mind. It was more painful to live with himself than it was to take his own life.
Wow.
So he made the decision to take his own life because that was less painful than the emotional pain he was feeling.
Oh, terrible. Absolutely terrible.
I kind of understood this, and I thought, right, I need to go to therapy. I need to take this, to another level, really, and really understand myself better, because I'd worked through my anger, but I knew I wasn't 100% thriving or feeling as good as I could. And I went to therapy, and I thought I'd done all of this work on my anger, and it was sort of all, I'd been on a journey, I was coming towards the end of it, but what I discovered is it was just starting. And very quickly it helped me realize I had a problem with anxiety. And
And that was leading to the anger?
That was a massive contributor to the anger, yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the anxiety is interesting, right? Because therapy is amazing. I think everyone should go to therapy. It was game-changing for me. And with my anxiety, and I think this is the same for a lot of people, what tends to happen is we live in the past or we live in the future. Now, what happened with me is that I would always be living in the future, be constantly trying to predict things. And our brains are prediction machines, right? So once we overthink, our brain gets into this pattern of overthinking, and the brain likes to predict to keep us safe. So I would just be living in the future, constantly worrying about stuff that could happen.
Yeah.
And I would spend so much time worrying about stuff that could happen. It was just making me super anxious. I would massively procrastinate. And therapy was amazing because what it did is it helped me understand that what my brain was doing was normal, because I'd suffered from some traumas in my past, some big traumas, some small traumas. Traumas is individual to the person. But essentially, right, what my brain was doing, it was trying to stop this past trauma repeating itself in the future. So the brain, as the prediction machine that it is, would constantly try and predict the future to keep me safe.
To stop you getting into the circumstances that would create that. Okay, I understand.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And that's what's happening with a lot of people, right? But ultimately, we don't fully understand this until we really get into things like therapy, because it's all subconscious a lot of the time.
Right.
But what was amazing, once I understood that, I'm quite a logical person, right? Okay, so past traumas, awful, felt terrible, don't want to go through that again. So the brain just tries to protect me by constantly predicting the future and constantly trying to steer me away from these potential traumas. So once I understood that, it was like, right, boom, I control my anxiety. The anxiety didn't control me.
Absolutely.
Because I understood it.
Yeah.
So once I'd worked through that, again, I was making progress. I was feeling really good. I got into meditation around that time.
Okay, interesting.
The therapists, I've seen multiple therapists, but the first one was a mindfulness expert as well, and he sort of steered me towards mindfulness. Couldn't really pick it up. He said, "Oh, go and read this book," and it just didn't work for me. Right, I can't just go and read a book and suddenly start meditating.
No.
I eventually did a course, and when I did the meditation course, it was phenomenal in the sense that it helped me focus, and it helped me kind of like eradicate a lot of this noise, but it really helped me focus, which for business is perfect because, if you're more productive, your output is greater.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I got this secondary benefit that I'd never signed up for, right? I didn't know that was coming. But what meditation did is it helped me understand the voice in my head, and it helped me understand the way I was speaking to myself. Does that resonate with you? When I say voice in your head...
Yeah, I think we've all got one, haven't we?
Yeah, we've all got one. It was amazing, right? I was doing a gig in Paris last week, and I talked about the voice in your head, and I said, put your hand in the air if you resonate with the voice in your head. And everybody that doesn't put their hand up, you see them thinking. And I'm like, right, by the way, those people that don't resonate, are you saying to yourself now, oh, I haven't got a voice in my head? Because that is the voice in your head. You see what I mean? And then people just start laughing. And because everyone's got this voice in their head.
Of course.
And if they're thinking, I don't know if I've got a voice in my head, like that is the voice, right? So what I realized, it cracks me up, and you see people think. One guy scratched his head down the front. He was like scratching his head thinking about it. It's like something from a cartoon. But what I realized from that experience of meditation and becoming more aware of my thoughts was how I spoke to myself. And I was incredibly critical. I would beat myself up all the time, right? And if I spoke to a friend the same way that I spoke to myself internally, I'd have no friends. Because I was critical, I was harsh, I was horrible. And I thought, right, I need to change the way I speak to myself.
Right.
And that was the whole journey for me with meditation. And the first thing I did actually is I banned the word should, because I used to say constantly, oh, you should have done that, you should have done that, or you should have done that differently. And what that means is that everything that I did wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough. I'd beat myself up after everything. So once I realized the power of speaking to myself in a more positive way, I was kind of on this path of, right, I've got through my anger, I understand my anxiety, I've found this amazing tool in meditation that really helps me. And I thought I was doing pretty well. And then something hit me like a ton of bricks, and I think it helped hit a lot of people. And that was COVID-19. I got wiped out by that. Because,
oh, really? Well, you got COVID yourself, and
no, I did get COVID, yeah. But when I say wiped out, I kind of mean just sort of mentally, I just got completely floored by it because I'm an extrovert, right? I get my energy from being around other people. So put me in a room for a few hours, I'm going to get bored, I'm going to start scratching the walls. But to do that for a couple of years was really, really tough for me. But
sure. Same here.
Yeah, I say that like I'm the only one, right? It wasn't easy for anybody.
Sure. Yeah.
But what was particularly difficult about that time, Steve, was that we lost my father-in-law under pretty traumatic circumstances right at the beginning of lockdown. What was so tough about that was I had to watch my wife say goodbye to the second father that she's had before the age of 30. And the circumstances were quite traumatic. And then that happened. And then like lockdown comes in, right? So I became depressed for 2 years. And I didn't know I was depressed until I came out of it. But, you know, at my worst, I was laying on the floor of my office in my flat, completely paralyzed, unable to move, laying there in the fetal position, just looking at the wall, completely paralyzed.
Wow.
And I would do that. It happens to me a few times. I'd go in, I'd close the door, I'd lie down, and I'd be so unable to process what was happening. I had nothing inside of myself. I was so overwhelmed that I just couldn't move. I was paralyzed. And I would lay there until I had enough energy to drag myself up off the floor. I would literally swallow my fears, my insecurities, my worry. And I would open the door and I'd go back out into the house. And the reason I did that, and the reason I sort of suffered in silence, if you like, is because my view of a husband is to be there to support his wife, to be strong. And I've always had this, right? Growing up, I was always the carer in my family. I was always the one that would sort it out or look after people or resolve issues. Yeah. And I thought, right, my wife was going through this awful time. I need to support her. And the mistake I made, Steve, was that I gave my wife absolutely everything that I had. The mistake wasn't supporting my wife. I love my wife more than I could ever express. The mistake I made was giving her absolutely everything that I had, because I had absolutely nothing left for myself. Yeah. And I remember it vividly. I can see where I was. She went out one day for a walk, and I was in the kitchen. And after she left, I just burst out into tears. I was just so scared, worried, upset, exhausted. I just didn't know what to do, and I just burst into tears. And I'm not someone that cries a lot. And my wife came back in. She'd forgotten her jacket, and she came into the kitchen and she saw me crying, and she said, like, "Oh my God, like, what's happened? Is everything okay?" And for the first time in 2 years, I looked at her and I said, "No." I said, "I'm not okay." I said, "I'm so worried about you, and I'm so tired, and I'm just depleted." And what happened next, Steve, was really surprising to me, because I thought that I needed to protect my wife from all of these fears, insecurities, anger, exhaustion.
From yourself, you mean? Or?
So I just felt that my wife's processing the death of her stepfather, which is incredibly painful when you think about what she'd already been through, the loss of her biological father. And I don't know, I just thought that, well, if I come to her now and I say, like, okay, I'm not good, this is adding something extra to her plate for her to deal with. You're
adding to a burden, adding to a load, really, yeah.
Exactly, okay. Yeah, I thought it'd be a burden. But what happened next really surprised me, and it completely shifted my mindset, because when I expressed that to her, she said, "Thank you." She said, "Thank you for telling me. I've been wondering this whole time how you've been so strong. So I just can't understand how you've been so strong. And also, that's made me think, you know, am I not strong? Because if he can cope with it so well." And it made us become even more close. And we connected at a deeper level, where I was able to show up completely vulnerably and say, I am not good. Like, I need help. I am exhausted. And from that point onwards, I could begin to heal. And what I learned from that, Steve, is that you can't heal what you don't feel. And the opposite to depression is expression. Because, you know, in a sort of roundabout way with my anger, I learned that, you know, I shouldn't bottle my emotions, and I need to talk about my emotions. But what my depression really taught me is that you need to feel the emotions. And so much in life, we push stuff down, right? We push. But let me tell you, it's going to come back and bite you on the bum, big time. And that's kind of what happened to me. 2 years I was depressed for. When I came out of that, I kind of looked back on my journey of anger, anxiety, depression, and I've learned so much, right? So to circle back to the question of why I started Heddway, I kind of feel like I've got I've got a unique set of skills that I've built over the years that are perfect for a company like Heddway, because I worked for a massive global organization as a trainer. So I'm a professional trainer. I used to create courses, deliver courses in front of audiences, in front of groups, large presentations, small presentations. And I've got this almost like 2 decades of experience of delving into asking questions. Why are things like this? Why am I like this? Understanding emotions, understanding anxiety, understanding depression, and understanding anger.
I guess for you, it's not just the theory, because I mean, you're a professional trainer like I, and you know, we've both got the similar sort of corporate background there, but you've also got the personal experience.
Yeah.
So it's not you just training something that you've read in a book or you've been on a course yourself. You've actually been on a journey yourself, really. You've been there. You've felt the anger. You've had the depression. So you're absolutely qualified, both as a trainer, but also personally to deliver the training that you give.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I don't regret anything that's happened in my life. If I could go back to any one of those awful circumstances that I've been in, I'd do it again because it's made me the person that I am today.
Yeah, sure.
And, you know, I'm now in a position where, you know, I've got a science background. I've got a first-class master's in chemistry, which means I'm very analytical. So being able to take that kind of professional background of a trainer, my science background, I've been able to understand complex things and simplify them. That's my approach with Heddway. I take complexity and I make it simple. And through lots of the tools, tips that I share on my courses and some of the exercises and techniques, everything's simple, right? And everything's explained in a way which people can just get and people can grasp. And yeah, it's a journey through self-awareness, but the tools in particular, I feel like we should be taught some of the tools when we're kids. Like when no one's ever taught about how to cope with stress. No one's ever taught about how to cope with a sudden loss of someone close to you. We don't teach people this.
No, we don't know. And I mean, let's explore that. So, you know, thinking about the audience that we have for this podcast, you know, salespeople, sales managers, people like you and I.
Yeah.
You know, thinking about my own career where I've had moments of stress, I've had moments of anxiety, I've had moments of ill health through both of those things, really. Do you think that companies are sufficiently aware of these factors in terms of the importance of their team being aware of mental fitness as opposed to mental health? And we will come back and explore that, by the way. But in terms of the, you know, understanding their own internalization, the things that you've explained, do you think companies are geared up for that, really?
No, is a short answer.
I'd agree, yeah.
But also, right, we say that in terms of our companies geared up. Like, are people in life geared up for it? We're not. Like, human beings on the street, like, nobody's geared up for that. And I think what's really nice about the opportunity to work in the corporate sector is that we all go to work, and work is such a big part of our lives. Yeah. But the work that I do through Heddway is not only equipping people to be successful in business, but it's helping people be successful in life. Because we all need these skills. But companies are aware that, you know, we need to probably do more in this space. Are there enough options out there for companies to actually make a real difference? I'm not sure. Sometimes companies will book a guest speaker to raise awareness, but after that guest speaker leaves the room, you know, what are the company left with? Do they actually have tools that they can implement that will help in the long term? I'm not sure. So
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. And being able to provide that sort of first line or first port of call for their team, really, when the member of the team is having issues, really knowing where to go and creating the environment that it's okay to say, you know, I'm struggling, I need some help. So let's just go back to the question I asked you a minute ago, which was mental fitness. You've used that phrase now a few times, but what is mental fitness as opposed to mental health? What is the difference there?
Yeah, so that's a brilliant question. So I would say there's a short answer and a long answer, right? So the short answer is mental fitness is pretty much the same as mental health. But there's subtle but very powerful differences, right? Because I call it mental fitness, and maybe I'll talk you through an example of when I speak to audiences, what I do with them. So I ask audiences to say, tell me the first word that comes to mind when I say mental health. And the top 3 words I get, so the first one's depression. Can you guess what the other 2 would be?
Stress would be one, I would think.
Stress is up there.
Breakdown or, yeah.
Anxiety.
Anxiety, yeah.
So depression, anxiety,
course,
and stress,
yeah,
right?
Of course.
So these words are normally displayed on a big screen. And I make the point to the audience and I say, well, isn't it interesting that we've got a lot of negative words here? And if I ask you for the first word that comes to mind when I say physical health, you wouldn't all say broken arm, cancer, the flu. You wouldn't automatically go to all of the negatives. So isn't it interesting how with mental health, we just go towards the negatives? And that's why I call it mental fitness, because I think mental health has gotten a bit heavy. It's still got a big stigma around it. And mental fitness is a bit lighter. It's a bit more accessible. And I think we need to change the vernacular around it. I think people might feel more comfortable talking about their mental fitness rather than talking about
That's fascinating.
mental health.
Yeah, because it's got this negative kind of connotations around it. And still, I think the stigma of saying I've got some mental health issues. I think in society, isn't there really? If somebody says, I've got the flu, okay, let us know when you're better. I've got some mental health issues. Or,
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
And also, I use the word fitness, Steve, because it inherently implies that you have to invest time in it. Because with our physical fitness, we know that we have to invest time in our physical fitness to be fit, right? So if I sat on a sofa every day for a month, didn't go out and ate pizza, pasta, takeaways, watch Netflix, I'd have a lovely time, right? But if I got up at the end of that month and tried to run a 5K, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to be knackered, right? I'd probably pull a muscle. I would be, you know what I mean? Like I wouldn't be able to breathe properly. And it's the same for mental fitness. And what's happening today is that in that analogy, right, people could be sat on their sofa, not putting any effort in for a month, and they get up and they try and run a marathon because life comes and it hits us in the face, right? Stuff happens all the time that we don't expect.
Absolutely.
So we need to invest in our mental fitness the same way as we do as our physical fitness, which is why I talk about mental fitness, because not only is it the stigma element of it and making it more accessible, but just helping people understand that we need to invest in our mental fitness as well.
Got you. So we were chatting before we started recording about your company you've started and how it could possibly interact with the company I work for, really. And we were exploring, and I really want to share this with the listener, that what we do is we train skills, we train knowledge, we train ability, if you like. You don't know how to sell, well, we're training how to sell. You don't know how to close a sale, we're training how to close a sale, and so on. But what we can't train is the approach or the willingness side of things. You can think of sort of I know you're going to be a parent soon. I know you think of sort of a young children. Sometimes if they don't want to do something, it doesn't matter how much you try and show them how to do it, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I think in as adults, we've still got that behaviour, haven't we? So do you see any areas of overlap there between training skills, which is what we do, and possibly training the right mental attitude or the right approach? You see an area there for your business?
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly the space that I play in, because I did this again, right, at a presentation in Paris last week. I had a room full of global executives, about 50 global execs, and I started off with a question, and I put up a slide, and it was very overly simplified, but it said, skills plus attitude equals success. And I asked the audience, I said, think about the most successful salesperson you've ever worked with. And they all think, and I said, right, you've got someone in your mind. Does that individual have more skills or attitude? What's more important for that individual which contributed to their success? What do they have more of? An amazing attitude or amazing skills? And pretty much every single time I do this, 95% people minimum say attitude. Attitude is the most important thing when it comes to success. Yeah. So I make the point and I say, well, if attitude is the most important thing when it comes to success, why is the majority of our training geared around training skills? And there's nothing on attitude.
Absolutely.
And that's the space that I play in, Steve.
Interesting. I always relate things to the world of sport. And thinking of football players, I can think of loads of football players, we don't need to know the names, who've got all the ability in the world and for whatever reason didn't make the most of it because they didn't have the right attitude.
Yeah.
And you can think of lots of footballers that possibly they weren't the most talented, but had a great career because they had the right attitude, they had the right desire, the right hunger, and all those kind of things. So I can kind of see how that overlaps, really. So let's talk a bit more about Heddway then. And first of all, it's spelt with two D's.
Yeah.
Heddway. So why is that?
I can't spell, Steve. I need to speak to my brand expert about that. I've ballsed it up. No, so it's purposeful because Heddway is spelled slightly different. Now, I talked about being Welsh at the beginning of this podcast. So Heddway in the Welsh language means peace. And that's what I want to do with my courses, right? I want to bring a sense of inner peace to people as well. So it's a bit of a play on words.
Love it.
Also head, right? It's, you're using your head.
Of course,
it means peace. But headway as well means making progress. It means moving forward. That's the definition of what making headway means. And I want people to feel that as well, that when they come on my courses, that they're making progress in their lives.
Fascinating. So let's talk more about what it is you actually do in terms of the courses you do. So, you've started a new business, you've left the corporate world, which like most of us have done in George James as well. You've now got your own business and you're providing a range of training courses, providing a range of services. Let's talk a bit more about what actually you do and what you could offer the person listening to the podcast. Yeah,
absolutely. So there's a range of things that I offer from keynote speaking to workshops lasting 1 hour, 90 minutes to 2 hours, and one-day courses as well. The course that I do most of is called Mental Fitness Foundations.
Okay.
But I've got some courses in development as well, which are designed specifically for managers and teams. So I've got a course, Mentally Fit Managers, which I'm designing, which will be available next year. And then also Mentally Fit Teams as well. And just if that's not busy enough, I'm also designing a mindfulness meditation 8-week program.
Wow.
Because,
and how would that work? Is that something remote in that case, if it's 8 week? How do people consume that course?
Yeah, mostly remote, because it's that constant sort of weekly session.
Right.
It would be mostly remote. Ideally, what I would like to do is have a face-to-face element up front for week 1, and week 8 we'd all come back together as well.
And would that be a one-to-one or would that be as a group?
As a group.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting, Luke. And we were just chatting before the podcast about the statistics regarding how many days a year are lost in the UK through mental health issues as opposed to physical health issues. And it might be just worth sharing that as not as a justification, but as a bit of background as to why companies should invest into the kind of training that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, it hits the bottom line of companies, because if companies are thinking, is this worth the investment? What am I going to get back? Well, the investment is absolutely worth it because of the statistics I'm about to share. So in the UK alone, on an annual basis, at least 12 million days are lost due to people being off work due to depression or anxiety.
12 million days?
12 million.
Good grief.
In the UK. And a nice estimate that costs the UK economy £28 billion per year.
What in lost production?
Lost productivity, yeah, exactly.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. But you know what the scary thing is, Steve? I can guarantee you that's underreported, and people will understand why, right? Because not everyone's calling in and saying, hey, boss, I'm feeling really stressed out, I'm not coming into work. Or I'm feeling really anxious, I can't come in. Or I'm feeling depressed. What happens is, I'd argue, more than half the people would say, I've got a tummy bug, I've got food poisoning, I'm not feeling
because they're
well.
not comfortable owning up to the fact, and companies probably, if we're being really honest, they're kind of saying to themselves, well, yeah, he's going to say that, isn't he? He's off playing golf, or he's got the cinema for the day or something, yeah?
Yeah. So people just don't feel comfortable. We haven't got that environment yet where people feel comfortable.
Right.
So those statistics, underreported, so they're strong and they're scary, but it's just tip of the iceberg.
So there's a real return on investment there for the kind of training that you can provide in terms of lost productivity, lost days.
100%, yeah. So the training would reduce absenteeism, which means that it helps people feel healthy. They come to work, they don't have to take time off. When they're in work, they're more productive, because guess what? Happier employees, healthier employees are more productive.
Yeah, of course.
And also there's a huge piece about employee retention. Companies will have a very keen eye on their attrition rates, and it's expensive to recruit people. I've seen statistics of 30 grand at least to recruit a new hire. I've seen
completely, yeah.
And I've seen numbers north of that, right? In the industry that I used to be a part of, it was closer to 80, which is ridiculous. So yeah, keeping your employees happy and having a good company culture, which means you haven't got people leaving all the time. You stop one person in a year from leaving, you can earn back the money from one course 10 times over.
Absolutely. So look, it's been fascinating getting to know you better now and finding out more about your personal journey and what's got you to the position where you've formed your own company. I'm sure there's going to be lots and lots of interest in the services and the training that you provide. Where's the best place for the listener to find out more?
LinkedIn, I would say. So if you just search Luke Evans Heddway, and remember I can't spell, so Headway is different with a H.
Double D, two Ds.
Yeah, exactly. Or headway.com, my website.
And your website's on, I think, on the way because you're a new business, so the website's coming anytime soon, I think.
It's available as a landing page at the moment, but we're expanding it out. Yeah.
So for now, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn for now.
Fantastic, Luke. Really enjoyed chatting with you today. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Luxury of Choice. And if you have, don't forget to subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Spotify, then we'd love you to leave us a review. It really does help us in lots of mysterious ways. I'll be back in 2 weeks' time with my colleagues Jonathan and Prue when we'll be discussing another aspect of B2B technical sales. Until then, happy selling, and I'll talk to you soon.